this room was actually where I got the start of my career in mobile. I was actually sitting in that seat right there that Jim was in, and participating in a competition that was sponsored by RJI 5 years ago. And this was just a couple months after the App Store had opened up. If you can believe, it's been just over 5 years that we've had apps in our lives, and we've come this far. But just a little bit about me, because I think it's interesting for me to be in this position where I'm a product of not only RJI, but the University of Missouri, and also the Newsy, the Newsy system that you'll hear a lot more about over the next day, with Jim Spencer speaking tomorrow and a tour of our newsroom. But I do want to talk a little bit about the products and just what I've learned over my time. I was a journalism student. I was in the Convergence program. I graduated in 2010, and it was during this contest that I really learned a little bit about what mobile was capable of. And I was actually sitting in class one day, right around this time. It was probably the day after spring break, paying very little attention to class. I'm sorry, but I was really concerned about where I was going to be living the next year. And at the time, in Columbia, if you were a student, you were looking for new housing, you'd be browsing Craigslist, and you'd be looking at all. You'd just be browsing Craigslist basically, and you have a list of listings, but very little in terms of location. You can't really filter, by location on Craigslist too well. At least you couldn't back then. And my thought was, wouldn't it be great if you could just put these on a map and filter by just being able to see where these houses are located. And entered this idea in the competition. Built a team of 3 very talented developers along with myself, and we ended up going on to win the competition, and that was really great. But it was a couple months later that Jim Spencer over at Newsy got wind that I was in his class. I was in not his class specifically, but in his building, in one of the classes that Newsy teaches. And I was working on producing video, but I also had a little bit of knowledge in a space that no one had any knowledge in back then, which was how to build an app. And so he approached me and asked, basically, what would it take to build an iPhone app? And so Newsy's producing a bunch of content at that time. It's all web-based. That was totally that was the strategy and the road forward, though we both agreed that there was definitely an opportunity in mobile. So we created this initial first iPhone app. Speaking of an MVP, it did 2 things. It showed you videos, and it played videos, and that was all that it did. There was no sharing. There was no filtering by category. We did have search up in the corner. That was the only thing. But I think in the first version that we launched, you could only search the first 20 titles, so it wasn't super built out or anything. We had some success there, and it was about 4 months later that the iPad had been announced but was not out yet. So we sat down. The development team was the same one as Nearby. At that time, I was contracting with Newsy, and we were just kind of trying to figure this out. And we built what we thought was going to be a great iPad app, but totally sight unseen. Had never touched an iPad. Had only looked at what it was like in the videos. We weren't even sure if it was going to run well, but we made sure that app was in the store on day one. We were probably one of the first video news apps on the iPad at that point. Since then, and that was my senior year of college. Thanks to a lot of the help of people in the room, I graduated, and I was very happy. And then I joined Newsy, and if we look back at our strategy at the time, we realized that there was definitely an opportunity in mobile, and we started to pour our resources into mobile. And looking back, we might have made a mistake in seeing mobile as its own silo. We didn't really view it as an ecosystem the way that I do now, and I'll speak a little bit more about that. But we put our resources into building every app that we could. Back then, we didn't really know if the iPhone or Android or Windows or Symbian or BlackBerry or Intel Atom was going to be the dominant OS of the future. iOS was way ahead, but Android was coming right up behind. Microsoft has tons of money. You never really know how that's going to shake out. So we built all kinds of apps. We definitely stratified ourselves there. A lot of MVPs. Certainly we're just trying to get them out into the marketplace and measure the response. And so in return, as we kind of ignored the web, our SEO suffers, design becomes a little stale, and that's something that in the last year or so we've really tried to come back around to. And the reason is because web is, as I see it, it's a first impression platform. If you view it in its own silo, it doesn't really necessarily help your other products. But if you think of web as your first impression at the very top of the funnel, then it becomes a user acquisition source. You've got SEO that you can make major gains on. But if you think about it too, almost all of the existing push marketing tactics that we have for sharing content right now, almost all live on the web. They're all web transactions. If you're sharing any content out of an app, especially to Facebook or Twitter, you're sharing a URL. You need those OG tags to put the images in there to make them interesting for people to click on. And yeah, there's some expansion with deep linking, but it's still mostly a web transaction. You can go to a site, and it'll probably be a mobile site. In this case, right now, the way that Newsy works is you go from the Newsy app to a Facebook wall or timeline, and then that link, if you're on a phone, will take you, to our mobile site. That's still, how that works, and so you can't ignore web in mobile. Now, the other, and we were talking about this just a couple minutes ago, you have to think a lot about the context in which you use these products and use the, or at least consume the content. In this case alone, if you look at these three images, this is the same app being used in three extremely different infrastructure use case scenarios. You have a mobile person who's on a handset who's actually moving in a train in Chicago, specifically the Blue Line, which I'm very familiar with. You're going underground and above ground and underground and above ground over and over and over again. If you're trying to deliver a piece of content like streaming video that requires a persistent connection, this is a major challenge. There's not a lot of bandwidth when you're underground to continue delivering that video. In this case, you've got a second screen use case. That's probably at home on Wi-Fi. That's great. That's awesome. You can send almost as much video as you want in that case. But here you've got someone consuming content on a bar, on their phone in a bar. Do you really want to be pumping them 1080p video while they're sitting there, on a cell connection, burning through their data? That's one way to, lose users in a fast way. So, we try to learn a lot about the way that our users use our apps, and you can look at that on so many different ways, and you can look at it by screen size or by app. But for the most part, we're trying to determine just the different types of ways that people are using it, and not necessarily the time of day, though that helps. This is our mobile consumption, but we've got web right here in the middle with a big hump, and that just it further complicates the issue, especially when you're looking at times that you're publishing editorial content or times to send push notifications. You really have to look at it on a case-by-case basis of platform. But then we're also looking at the specific contextual use cases. Are people using this in the morning? Are they sitting down with breakfast? Or anecdotally, we learned that a lot of people like to come home from work, hit play, and just go through the videos that we've produced that day. And it allows them to catch up on the news that they haven't necessarily caught while they were at work, away from media. And that leads us kind of to dynamic streaming, where we were talking a little bit before. It's a big issue in Africa, where you're trying to deliver content that is packaged down and compressed and makes sense for the use case. But it's the same issue here, and we're keeping a very close eye on data caps. The future of unlimited data on mobile, I think, is a very murky one, and we've already seen that. It's almost impossible to get a real reliable unlimited data package. So one thing that that has come out in video is dynamic streaming. As a user's bandwidth goes up and down, the content itself reacts, and you'll see this, often on Netflix. Even if you're at home watching, you get someone else to fire up a Netflix stream, and the two will degrade. But the consideration here for us, and one of the challenges here, is even here in Columbia, where we've got LTE coverage, you can get almost 20 meg down on your phone, which is rivaling any Wi-Fi connection. Should we still be serving the top end 1080p video that you would get over Wi-Fi to someone who necessarily has the who has the bandwidth but may not have the overhead in their data plan? So that's one consideration and one challenge I think that we'll have to look at in the future as as data caps come and go. Another challenge is stratification and multiple standards. This isn't just an Android problem, though that's the one that just tends to get the most press. You've got everything from different screen sizes to different resolutions. The assets that you put in your app have to be different sized, and but then you've also you have different processors. You even have different computing architectures, and that's one issue that we ran into just very recently. There's a number of frameworks, partner frameworks in our apps that we utilize, and one of them was not hadn't been compiled for 64-bit computing. We found that there's a bug in iOS 7 that if your frameworks and your app isn't compiled for ARM64, that the share sheet doesn't work. So we found, we saw a very precipitous drop in the number of shares that came out of this specific app, and it took us a long time to figure it out. That it was the 64-bit devices, the most recent ones to have come out, that people weren't able to share on. So in some ways it can be real tough if you're bringing in all of these third-party frameworks and trying to work around those. And then caching and reliability, another issue that we ran into recently. Striking a balance between really beautiful design and beautiful images and using data responsibly, kind of back to this dynamic streaming. One case on iOS specifically is with iOS 7, you get background downloading of data. So at certain times during the day, we can, users' devices will actually pull down our most recent stories and images. And one of the challenges there is, if that user pulls down data, and we've actually gone and updated the story since that data was pulled down, the question becomes: do we push them an entirely new set of data, or are we good with what they have, and do we try to tack on or adjust it in some way? So that's been a little bit of a challenge there. And then one thing that we're trying to do right now too is move away from the idea of big data and more toward actionable data. With Flurry specifically, that's what we use for a majority of our mobile analytics. Years ago, we rushed in and we tried to measure every single thing that we could. And what we found when we got to the point that we were actually doing analysis on that data was that either we'd installed it wrong and it wasn't reliable, or it wasn't necessarily something that we felt we could draw a conclusion from. And so what we're trying to do now is pay a lot more attention to and think real heavily about 4 or 5 different pieces of data that we can use to measure our app health and our business health. And that's moving away from vanity metrics, stuff like number of downloads over the course of time that apps will often publish, and looking more at increasing the number of video views per share. How much investment or how much return do we get on increasing or improving the share functionality of our apps? And what all that data eventually, hopefully, leads to is some machine learning and personalization. I see mobile as really being one of the places that we can reach people on the one-to-one level, and that's utilizing their location, their specific device, and then their viewing habits and preference of content to deliver content that makes sense for that user specifically. And then the very last piece I think that's really interesting for mobile is push notifications, and we touched on this. But in essence, you're landing on the virtual doorstep of people, and we haven't really had this in media since people started delivering newspapers. This is as close as we can get to delivering headlines to someone's front door, and even better in most cases. So, we talked a bit about this morning about just getting content into social media, and that happenstance, I forget the term that was used in the very first presentation this morning, but running into content that's being injected into social streams. Your phone is also, in essence, a news stream. This is the notification center on iOS, and you can see Newsy's contents in there. You have Hangouts, and This Is My Sports. Go Royals today. But I think push notifications are really that last mile, in essence, and are really going to be big for our company, as well as many of yours, as we begin to and further tailor our content to the one-to-one level. So that's all I have. Happy to take any questions.
It's still a shy group. So in terms of optimizing content to mobile and different, you've kind of seen it go from .com to sort of really more of a mobile experience. Any observations that you take away, understanding what you said about silos and about not really being able to, any takeaways as that migratory pattern, if it's a migratory pattern, and I think there's a question about that, exists?
Yeah, I definitely think that they are very different use cases. And in my view and in my personal, in my roadmap going forward, that is one of my big goals, is learning more about how we can tailor the specific content to a specific device. And not just in the way that we have with presenting different UIs based on the different use cases that we have for those devices, but actually the content, and working with our editorial department and our social media department on figuring out how we produce physically different pieces of data and content and stories for an iPhone, an iPad, an Android, and not only getting to the device level, but to the personal level. So that you and your iPad is going to be totally different from the news that I see on my iPhone. And so that's really where I'm trying to go, and trying to build an infrastructure that will allow us to get there.
And to follow up on that, how far away do you think you are on that?
Luckily, you're the only one asking me right now. We're still a little ways off, but we are starting to get some of those foundational pieces in place. We've retooled our CMS completely, focusing a little bit more on the atomization of news, if you will, and breaking news down into pieces, and training our staff on how data is structured and how good data can be used in the future. So there's definitely an education piece that goes along with bringing the newsroom up to speed and understanding how articles aren't just articles anymore. There's a lot of metadata and a lot of literally bits that go into the delivery of news today.
So what are you guys thinking about over at Newsy in terms of wearable technology?
We're playing with Google Glass. I personally, I can't wait to finally end up with a watch that I think is worth wearing all the time. I still really love my classic. But I definitely think there's an opportunity, and I think a lot of that comes in push notifications and delivery of headlines. I don't know how far we are from being able to watch video right here. I think that's probably a constraint of battery life in some ways, but I definitely think there's a massive opportunity there, and excited for it to come along.
Anybody else? Yeah. Oh, go ahead. Back.
If I may, you talked about mobile web being the first impression platform. So help me understand your view then on mobile web versus native apps, and kind of how you balance those when you're looking at product roadmaps.
Absolutely. So I try to view them very equally. In my mind, they play very different roles. Oftentimes I think A native app is a little bit, further down at the user funnel or the acquisition funnel. If you can get a user to your mobile app and get them to sign up for a push notification, you're probably pretty set as far as getting them to return to the app and become a regular user. But it's the other way too. Sometimes you'll acquire a user through App Store optimization, and you're up at the top of the list, or you gain some favorable featuring from Apple, and you achieve a lot of users that way. But in my mind, it's just one piece of the puzzle. Each is just as important as the other, and if you can get users to engage with you in both places, that's really key. It's just about finding the different ways that you can reach them across their entire digital, the way that they consume news across all of the web.
Ruben?
Hey, Tony, just a quick question. There was a question earlier about, a lot of the news that we're consuming on mobile devices is still text-based, and I wonder what your take on that is.
I think there's definitely there's a lot to be said about text on mobile, and the reason I know that is because every time we make a change to the way that we display our transcripts in our iPhone app, my inbox is barraged. People can't find them, or they don't like the way that we treat the new text, and there's always going to be those situations where streaming video may not be the best way to consume content. And that's one of the reasons that we've always offered up a transcript with our videos on our apps, is because there are so many people who really would rather just read the content, or they're in a position where they're unable to watch a video. They could be on a crowded train, or they could be in a library somewhere. And so I do think I don't think text is going away in any way.
Brenda Poor?
Just one quick question. I'm going to be really embarrassed to ask this, but what is a native app?
Sure. Native app is any of the apps that you would think of on your phone that kind of sit on the home page. So anything that's not running in a browser.
All right, Tony Brown, thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.